Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together for another session of fellowship immersed in not only the words, but also the wisdom and the faces of Torah, which are many, many, many. The faces that are here today represent aspects of the beautiful Torah that we receive and we continue to write together. This week we are in Parshat Bo, the book of Exodus, chapter 10, beginning with verse 1. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this point, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for this moment. Baruch
Baruch atah
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu melech
haolam
haolam
asher
asher
tirkanu mitzvotav
banu
v'tzivanu
banu
so
v'tzivanu Torah.
Thank you, God, for the opportunity this moment to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. We will read through the English translation of our weekly portion. I'll share with you a focused study about it, and then together we will share in a collective conversation about it. I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. Book of Exodus, chapter 10, verse 1. God said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers, in order that I may display these my signs among them, and that you may recount in the hearing of your children and of your children's children how I made a mockery of the Egyptians and how I displayed my signs among them, in order that you may know that I am Adonai." So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says Adonai, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go that they may worship me. For if you refuse to let my people go, tomorrow I will bring locusts on your territory. They shall cover the surface of the land so that no one will be able to see the land. They shall devour the surviving remnant that was left to you after the hail, and they shall eat away all your trees that grow in the field. Moreover, they shall fill your palaces and the houses of all your courtiers and of all the Egyptians, something that neither you, your fathers, nor your fathers' fathers have seen from the day they appeared on earth to this day." With that, he turned and left Pharaoh's presence. Anna, would you like to read a little bit at verse 7?
Thank you. Pharaoh's courtiers said to him, "How long shall this one be a snare to us? Let their notables go to worship their God, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Are you not yet aware that Egypt is lost?" So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go worship your God, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Who are the ones to go?" Moses replied, "We will all go, regardless of social station. We will go with our sons and daughters, our flocks and herds, for we must observe Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's festival." But he said to them, "Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh be with you, the same as I mean to let your dependents go with you. Clearly, you are bent on mischief. No, you menfolk go and worship Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, since that is what you want." And they were expelled from Pharaoh's presence.
Thank you. Tony, would you like to read a little bit at verse 12?
Thank you. Adonai said to Moses, "Hold out your arm over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat up all the grasses in the land, whatever the hail has left." So Moses held out his rod over the land of Egypt, and Adonai drove an east wind over the land all that day and all night. And when morning came, the east wind had brought the locusts. Locusts invaded all the land of Egypt and settled within all the territory of Egypt in a thick mass. Never before had there been so many, nor will there ever be so many again. They hid all the land from view, and the land was darkened, and they ate up all the grasses of the field and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left. so that nothing green was left of tree or grass of the field in all the land of Egypt.
Thank you. And June, would you like to read a little bit, starting with verse 16?
Thank you, Rabbi. Pharaoh hurriedly summoned Moses and Aaron and said, I stand guilty before the Lord your God and before you. Forgive my offense just this once, and plead with the Lord your God that he but remove this death from me. So he left Pharaoh's presence and pleaded with the Lord. The Lord caused a shift to a very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and hurled them into the sea of reeds. Not a single locust remained in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. Then the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arm toward the sky, that there may be darkness upon the land of Egypt, a darkness that can be touched. Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was, but all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings.
Thank you. Jim, would you like to continue there at verse 24?
Thank you, Rabbi. Pharaoh then summoned Moses and said, go worship Adonai. Only your flocks and your herds shall be left behind. Even your children may go with you. But Moses said, you yourself must provide us with sacrifices and burnt offerings to offer up to Adonai our God. Our own livestock too shall go along with us. Not a hoof shall remain behind, for we must select from it for the worship of Adonai our God. And we shall not know with what we are to worship the Adonai until we arrive there. But Adonai stiffened Pharaoh's heart and said he would not agree to let them go. Pharaoh said to him, begone from me. Take care not to see me again, for the moment you look upon my face, you shall die. And Moses replied, you have spoken rightly. I shall not see your face again.
Thank you so much. And Dave, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 11?
And Adonai said to Moses, I will bring but one more plague upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. After that, he shall let you go from here. Indeed, when he lets you go, he will drive you out of here, one and all. Tell the people to borrow, each man from his neighbor and each woman from hers, objects of silver and gold. God disposed of the Egyptians favorably toward the people. Moreover, Moses himself was much esteemed in the land of Egypt, among the Pharaoh's courtiers and among the people. Moses said, thus said Adonai, toward midnight I will go forth among the Egyptians, and every male firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on his throne, to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstones, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And there shall be a loud cry on all the land of Egypt, such as has never been, nor will ever be again. But not a dog shall snarl at any of the Israelites, at a human or a beast, in order that you may know that Adonai makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Then all the courtiers of yours shall come down to me and bow low to me, saying, depart, you and all your people who follow you. After that I will depart. And he left Pharaoh's presence in hot anger. Now Adonai had said to Moses, Pharaoh will not heed you, in order that my marvels may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron had performed all these marvels before Pharaoh, but Adonai has stiffened the heart of Pharaoh so that he would not let the Israelites go from the land.
Thank you so much. David and Susan, would you like to continue at the very start of chapter 12?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. Speak to the whole community of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, let it share one with a neighbor who dwells nearby in proportion to the number of persons. You shall contribute for the lamb according to what each household will eat. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of this month, and all the assembled congregation of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they are to eat it. They shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs.
Do not eat from it raw, nor in any way cooked in water, but fire roasted, the head with its shanks and with its entrails. You shall leave nothing from it by morning, and what is left of it by morning in fire you shall burn it. And thus shall you eat it, your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is a Passover offering to the Lord. And I will cross the land of Egypt on this night, and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from man to beast, and from all the gods of Egypt I will exact retributions. I am the Lord, and the blood will be a sign for you upon the houses in which you are, and I will see the blood, and I will pass over you. And no scourge shall become a destroyer amongst you when I strike in the land of Egypt.
Thank you both so much. Rose, would you like to continue there at verse 14?
Okay. This day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to Hashem through the ages. You shall celebrate it as an institution for all times. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the very first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. You shall celebrate a sacred occasion on the first day and a sacred occasion on the 7th day. No work at all shall be done on them, only what every person is to eat. That alone may be prepared for you. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your ranks out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe this day through the ages as an institution for all times. In the first month, from the 14th day of the month, evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. No leaven shall be found in your houses for 7 days. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person, whether a stranger or a citizen of the country, shall be cut off from the community of Israel. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your settlements you shall eat unleavened bread.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you so much. And Kath, would you like to continue there at verse 21?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Moses then summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go, pick out lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover offering. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the 2 doorposts. None of you shall go outside the door of your house until morning. For Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, when going through to smite the Egyptians, will see the blood on the lintel and the 2 doorposts, and Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home. You shall observe this as an institution for all time, for you and for your descendants. And when you enter the land that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will give you, as promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, who passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when smiting the Egyptians, but saved our houses. The people then bowed low in homage, and the Israelites went and did so, just as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did.
Thank you. And Robert, would you like to continue there at verse 29?
Yes, thank you. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne, unto the firstborn, the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, Rise up and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as ye have said. And take your flocks and your herds as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We will all be dead. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians.
Thank you so much. Justin, would you like to continue there at verse 37?
Thank you, Rabbi. The children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 on foot, the men besides the young children. And also a great mixed multitude went up with them, and flocks and cattle, very much livestock. They baked the dough that they had taken out of Egypt as unleavened cakes, for it had not leavened, for they were driven out of Egypt, and they could not tarry, and also they had not made provisions for themselves. And the habitation of the children of Israel that they dwelled in Egypt was 430 years. It came to pass at the end of 430 years, and it came to pass in that very day that all the legions of the Lord went out of the land of Egypt. It is a night of anticipation for the Lord to take them out of the land of Egypt. This night is the Lord's guarding all the children of Israel throughout their generations. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, This is the statute of the Passover sacrifice. No estranged one may partake of it. And every man's slave purchased for his money, you shall circumcise him. Then he will be permitted to partake of it. A sojourner or a hired hand may not partake of it. It must be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the meat out of the house to the outside, neither shall you break any of its bones. The entire community of Israel shall make it, and should a proselyte reside with you, he shall make a Passover sacrifice to the Lord. All his males shall be circumcised, and then he may approach and make it, and he will be like the native of the land. But no uncircumcised male may partake of it. There shall be one law for the native and for the stranger who resides in your midst. All the children of Israel did as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. It came to pass on that very day that the Lord took the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt with their legions.
Thank you so much. Wendy, would you like to read a little bit, the very start of chapter 13?
Thank you. The Lord spoke further to Moses, saying, Concentrate to me every firstborn, man and beast, the first issue of every womb among the Israelites is mine. And Moses said to the people, Remember this day on which you went free from Egypt, the house of bondage, how the Lord freed you from it with a mighty hand. No leavened bread shall be eaten. You go free on this day in the month of Abib. So when the Lord has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, is that how you say it?
Hittites,
The
yes.
Amorites, the Havarites, is that correct?
Hivites,
And
yes.
the Jebusites, which he swore to your father to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall observe in this month the following practice. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a festival of the Lord. Throughout the 7 days unleavened bread shall be eaten. No leavened bread shall be found with you, and no leaven shall be found in all your territory. And you shall explain to your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt.
Thank you. And Catherine, would you like to read starting there at verse 9?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Mhm.
And this shall serve you as a sign on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead that with a mighty hand Adonai freed you from Egypt. You shall keep this institution at its set time from year to year. And when Adonai has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and to your fathers and has given it to you, you shall set apart for the Lord every first issue of the womb, every male firstling that your cattle drop shall be the Lord's, but every firstling ass you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck, and you must redeem every firstborn male among your children. And when in time to come your son asks you, saying, What does this mean? You shall say to him, It was with a mighty hand that Adonai brought us out of Egypt, the house of bondage. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord slew every firstborn in the land of Egypt, the firstborn of both man and beast. Therefore I sacrificed to Adonai every first male issue of the womb, but redeem every firstborn among my sons. And so it shall be as a sign upon your hand and as a symbol on your forehead, that with the mighty hand Adonai freed us from Egypt.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. I invite you to go ahead and take out a copy of the study sheet, and I'd like to share with you just a little bit of a focus study about this week's portion. And when I was studying the portion this week, this portion contains the last 3 of the plagues, and I was struck this year by how the penultimate plague is that of darkness, and then of course the ultimate plague is that of death. And I was just kind of contemplating and reflecting on how we approach this moment of desperation, this moment of release for the Israelites, in this moment of condemnation for Pharaoh, with these 2 plagues in particular, darkness and then death. So I'm just contemplating the notion about, well, why has it come in that order? Well, I guess we can understand why death would be the ultimate punishment, the ultimate plague. And I was just thinking, well, why darkness? So that for me, there's a sense in which there is this building momentum of leading to complete sense of the inability to see people. The Egyptians could not see one another. It lasts for 3 days. I try to imagine what darkness in ancient Egypt must have been like for a period of 3 days, where day and night you couldn't see the person next to you. You couldn't see anything around you. All you were aware of was your own isolation. It must have been absolutely terrifying. And then the next step, it seems, after that sense of complete terror and isolation, is the experience of death. So I want to play a little bit and explore a little bit this notion of the terror, the fear, the sense of isolation, and how that then segues into the ultimate sense of isolation, which is death. So I have here in number one this description from these two plagues. Thick darkness descended upon all the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was. There was no house where there was not someone dead. So we have darkness and isolation, fear, immobility, and death. And I want to explore a little bit about Pharaoh as the one who has, in a sense, engendered this for his civilization. Pharaoh is the one who, as we encountered in last week's portion, and in particular, it's made express in last week's Haftarah portion, that Pharaoh is this character who feels that he himself is not only invulnerable, but that everything that exists is because of him, and that therefore he holds title to everything. And Pharaoh has this incapacity to let go of anything. And so he is this antagonist to the power of God, who will be expressed through Moses and the Israelites, that of liberation. And if you remember last week, we studied this notion about how Pharaoh complains about the Israelites as being shirkers, and we explored that notion of shirkers as having to do with a sense of relaxation, of letting go, of a sense of playfulness. And so these are the oppositions that are being portrayed here in this story, that of holding on to everything, feeling that everything is a result of one's own efforts, and then a sense of letting go, a sense of gratitude, and a sense of freedom and liberation. So the interesting textual conundrum is raised here in the very first verse of our Torah portion. And I have it here in number 2, and I have it in Hebrew. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe. And God said to Moses, Bo el Pharaoh. Of Paro. Thank you. So the word bo means come, but in most translations, it says go to Pharaoh. So this notion about why is the word for come being translated as go? And so our mystical text, the Zohar, picks up this little bit of a quandary. Why does it say come to Pharaoh? It should have said go to Pharaoh, which would have been more like lech leparo. God brought Moses into a chamber within a chamber to the supernal and mighty serpent, from which many levels evolve, which Moses feared to approach himself. When the Holy Blessed One saw that Moses was afraid, the Blessed Holy One waged war against him. So the Zohar is now taking this notion about, well, it says come, because what's really happening here is Moses is not being directed outward to address some kind of external enemy or force. Moses is being drawn into something, namely into his own self, to encounter there the obstacles to Moses's own evolving liberation of self. He is being drawn into to experience his own terror and fear about confronting how absolutely evil Pharaoh is. And Moses, upon his first encounter with that level of fear within himself, seems to become immobilized. And at that moment, he hears this divine voice, this divine experience that seems to convey a reassurance, saying, I'll be with you. I'm going to be by your side when you confront this force of evil. That notion about going within oneself is, I think, perhaps a key part of any hero's journey. It's not just merely dealing with the outside world and outside obstacles, but the hero, as a leader of people, undergoes a transformation of self. And in popular culture, we see that in Star Wars, and in particular, The Empire Strikes Back. If you remember, Luke has to undergo further training, and he goes to this isolated planet to meet with Yoda, who becomes his trainer. And at one point, Yoda directs him to go into this cave. And this is this little bit of dialogue that ensues in the movie. Yoda says, "In you must go." Luke, what's in there? Yoda, only what you take with you. And of course, what happens in the movie is that then Luke encounters all these phantoms that are really manifestations of his own subconscious and his own fears, which he has to overcome before he can complete his training as a Jedi, as someone who's going to lead forth a liberation of a people. So with that, I invite you to turn over. We're going to look at this painting, which I'm sorry, it's on the front. You should probably look at the painting. This painting by Roberto Matta. So a little bit about Roberto Matta. Roberto Matta was born in Chile in 1911. He is encouraged by his parents, especially his mother, to pursue his interests in art and literature and languages. And he eventually, in his early 30s, he goes to France to explore art, and he becomes an apprentice to the modernist architect Le Corbusier. And while he's in Paris, he comes in contact with and develops very close relationships with some of the members of the Latin American literary avant-garde, including Federico Garcia Lorca, Pablo Neruda, and Gabriela Mistral. If nothing else happens from this conversation than this, I hope that you get to know a little bit more about Gabriela Mistral. Gabriela Mistral was also born in Chile, and she was born in 1889, and she was the first Latin American author to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. And I invite you to explore her poetry. She also served as a diplomat at different points in her life, and she's quite an extraordinary woman. He also met, while he's in Paris, Salvador Dali, who encourages him in his artwork, and gradually Matta becomes immersed in the Surrealist movement there, located in France. Then in 1939, he, along with many other artists, and in particular the Surrealists, they flee Europe He comes to New York, and while he's in New York, he develops relationships with many of the artists who would eventually form the abstract expressionist movement. And they learn a lot from him about what surrealism is all about, and there's a lot of cross fertilization that goes on within this group. Mata brings to his artwork, on the one hand, the surrealist exploration of the interior self, of one's subconscious. He also brings a very strong sense of social awareness and activism. A lot of his paintings include what he called inscapes, that is, maps of the mind, as well as what would be called biomorphic vistas on the world, on the outside world. And what we have here in this painting is a painting called Years of Fear. He painted it in 1941. So this is just 2 years after he has fled Europe and he's in New York, and reflected, I think, on this canvas, which is really, it's a landscape. It's a landscape, I want to suggest, that incorporates both the outside world and the internal world. It, on the upper right-hand corner, we see this flurry of a swirl of cataclysmic events. And I want to suggest it's cataclysmic events that represent both what's happening in the Europe that he fled, and is probably also reflecting some of the anxiety and fears that are running through himself as he's considering, reflecting on what is happening to the world, and probably to many friends that he had to leave behind. If you move down and then in the painting, and then move also towards the bottom left-hand side, we have a different sense of feeling. We have different colors that are emerging. We have some blues and yellows and grays. There's some sense of, at least more sense of order than what appears in the upper right-hand corner. So there's some kind of engagement, some kind of conflict, confrontation that's going on between the chaos in the upper right-hand corner and then some measure of resolution or order that's happening down below it. And for him, for Mata, canvas constituted what he described a battlefield. And what he meant by a battlefield, he wrote, was not a physical battlefield, one inside of us, dealing with our fears, dealing with our hate, dealing with our suspicions, dealing with our sense of lack of trust. And these are aspects that he says we all need to engage in if we're going to become more fully developed and realized human beings. And now, if you'd like to turn over, number 4 is his quote. Everything in this painting is psychological. How to picture the battlefield, not the physical one, but the one inside of us, fear against courage, criticism, hate, suspicion, and trust. I want to suggest that this notion that he's now describing here, this sense of fear, which is described in this narrative that we've just read of darkness and death, this darkness that lasted for 3 days, this darkness that was so all-encompassing that people not only couldn't see the person next to them, it was so immobilizing that no one could move for 3 days from the place that they were in. I want to suggest that Jewish wisdom and text, in a sense, acknowledges that life has built in a sense of existential insecurity. And we read that in our opening studies about Genesis. There's a way in which we read the story of creation, not as a beautiful, sunny story of just things coming to life, but we also read that there was a sense of insecurity, a destabilization that the story of creation represents. And in the Talmud, we read these words from the early rabbis who describe birth as not merely a beautiful event, but it's also an event in which we leave behind, once from when we're in the womb, a sense of all knowledge. We have a sense of attachment to a total reality. And then as soon as we're born, we begin to forget everything that we knew from before. And then in Kabbalah, there's a sense that existence is an effect of cosmic detachment. And so I think Jewish wisdom acknowledges that to be alive is also to be in fear, because it's a fear that comes from a sense of detachment from a wholeness. And so Judaism becomes a spiritual practice designed to help us overcome that sense of fear that arises from the reality of separation. Now, I want to suggest that what's happening in this Torah portion and what happens as in the Zohar is trying to describe it is that fear is as immobilizing and death is experienced as the ultimate in isolation. And so it is an existential loneliness that is the root of fear. And so the Zohar presents Moses as the model of what is needed in order to overcome the fear, which is rooted in that sense of isolation and loneliness. And he needs to overcome that because he's going to need to lead a people in equally so overcoming their sense of fear, because what awaits them is an expanse that's going to be defined by a sense of covenant, that's going to be defined by a sense of connection, that's going to be defined by a sense of commitment to one another and an awareness of being attached to something that is transcendent, which is called in our story God. With that, I want to share with you this poem by Kehil Gibran that I came across that is called Fear. It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled from the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages. And in front of her, she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear. Because that's where the river will know it's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean.
Isn't that
That's lovely.
And so this is our concluding commentary from our artist, Roberto Mata. Resistance is in each of us. We resist by exercising our creativity. That is true poetry, when we seek new comparisons, other ways of looking and conceiving of things. And for that, I'd love to hear what you experienced, what you saw and encountered along our way of studying this week's Torah portion. If you raise your hand, I'd love to call upon you. Rose, please share with us.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. Well, the first thing I'd like to point out is Shrek means fear in Yiddish. So it's very interesting to me because there's this lovable monster, but his name means fear. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, when you was talking about fear, Bnei Israel is leaving Egypt, which is a culture of death. I mean, that's the most important thing to them, is how you mitigate death, how you can succeed in the afterlife. That's their whole focus of their culture. So, we're leaving that culture of death, which is fascinating to me. The description of the Pesach, the first Pesach, is very interesting. 2 points I want to make, and then I'll leave the scene for others to speak. Number one, the first Pesach, we always think of Pesach as this leisurely meal, sometimes too leisurely. I mean, sometimes it can go on forever. And certainly there are things in the Mishnah that talk about the rabbis, going on till the morning prayers. So here you have the first Pesach, though. You're supposed to have your shoes on, everything on, your hat on, your boots, everything ready to roll. So that's interesting to me. The second thing is the whole notion that the Jews, or many of Bnei Israel, would not, but none of Bnei Israel were integrated into Egyptian society is proved wrong here. Why? Because the doors have to be marked with blood, which means that Bnei Israel were living among the Egyptians. And this whole notion that, we were all running around like slaves with loincloths on and, building bricks is not altogether true. But number one, from this story, we know that they were integrated. Number two, that there were all these artisans who were able to build the Mishkan. So that idea that we were physically separated doesn't seem to hold from this narrative.
Thank you so much for pointing all of that out, Rose. Thank you so much. And let me go to Kath and then Justin.
Hi. I find myself struggling a lot with this Parsha and the one before. And the piece I struggle with is that there's this whole manipulation going on where we know that Pharaoh's a bad guy, but the fact that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is continually saying, I am manipulating Pharaoh, I'm hardening Pharaoh's heart. So as in, it's possible that Pharaoh might, go ahead and say, yeah, okay, you guys can go, but Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is intentionally not allowing him to do that. And it's like, it's a story, so I don't understand why that has to be part of it. I've struggled with it. I don't understand it. And then also, as Rose was saying, another aspect of the Israelites living in with the Egyptians is they're supposed to go to their neighbors and ask them for all their jewelry. So neighbors implies they're all in the same community and all of that. But it just seems like this could be done without this weird manipulation by God of making Pharaoh do this. And I need help with it because I totally don't understand it.
Okay. All right, we'll circle back to that unless someone else has a response to add as well. Let me call upon Justin and then Tony here and then Robert. Yeah. And Catherine. Justin, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'd like to at least respond because I feel very much aligned with that question and that issue, and I'm responding as an analytically trained Jungian psychologist, and I'm also responding as somebody who believes that Hashem does, in fact, represent the very essence of the Western spirit. And I would say that I'm extremely disappointed and angry with the divinity, and that is probably one of the most important possible religious positions to take at this point. Had this divinity consulted his omniscience for a moment, I don't see it, and I'm willing to just stand in that place of saying, this is it, this is the divinity, and I utterly disagree with it. There is a better way, and maybe we'll find that way now. That's my
Thank you, Justin. Thank you. Let me call upon Tony, and I'll get to Catherine and Robert. Yeah. And
Well, I
Margo.
was thinking the same thing as Kath, and I was trying to figure out why. And the only thing I could come up with was that Pharaoh considers himself to be all powerful, and maybe this is the way of God teaching him a lesson, that you are not all powerful, and he's hardening Pharaoh's heart, and then he's able to teach him these lessons. That's the only thing I could.
Sadism.
Well, I agree. But I have another question about the painting.
Okay.
There's a very strange creature on the left-hand side of the turmoil. What is that?
Where?
What do you think that represents? If you turn it sideways, it's a face of like a cat.
Point
Interesting.
on this to me while you're looking.
I
Oh, yeah, I see.
Okay.
Sort of in the center oh my God. Oh, yeah, shoot. Okay, sorry.
So it could be just what Tony is seeing there could be some manifestation, some of some monster emerging out of this cataclysm. The terror that's represented. I mean, when one is in darkness, especially the darkness that is being painted here, total darkness, not the darkness that we experience these days, but especially in ancient times, total darkness, that's the realm of predators and monsters. And so that could well be what is emerging out of this terrible cataclysm that
It's pretty creepy looking.
yeah. So thanks for pointing that out. Let me call upon some others who've got their hands up, and then Anna, if you wanted to speak as well. Catherine and then Robert.
Okay. Two thoughts that are sort of hitched together. The Israelites have to find a way to get out of the bondage that they're living in. And so initially, it seems the fear is of the Egyptians. The fear is of those who are holding them in bondage, or that's potentially what the fear is. So I sense that this is about rechanneling that fear into something else, trying to rechannel that fear into something else, which releases them from the fear of being in bondage. And as I look at this painting, which is about the scariest painting that I have ever seen. I mean, everywhere you look, there is a maelstrom of forces at work with grimacing faces and so on and so forth, and some things that we cannot identify. And I'm thinking, how is it possible that the Israelites could have lived through those plagues without some kind of fear? I mean, that the plagues themselves must have affected them to some degree as much as they did the Egyptians. It's hard to believe that people were immune from that.
So what you're saying is that the trauma impacts, there's collateral damage to this trauma that's meant to be directed at those who are enslaving people, but it affects it has this spillover. I think that's very interesting. Thank you. Okay. Did you want to say something more, Catherine? Yeah.
Well, I think that's such is the dilemma that the bondage creates.
That bondage has this impact on both sides of it. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Gotcha. Thank you. And maybe that's why there's this this bit of wisdom in Jewish tradition that it took one day for the Israelites to leave Egypt, but it took a lifetime to get Egypt out of out of the Israelites. Thank you for reminding us about that. Let me call upon Robert and Margot. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for another lovely evening. Always enjoy being with all of you. So I have a question. Can the lowly drop ever understand the sea? Can the painting understand the painter? Can the earth understand the Big Bang and the force behind it? There's a verse in the Baha'i writings where it says, he shall not be asked of his doings. This has been a test for humanity forever. So how do we view God? If I view myself as an equal to God, this is my understanding, friends. If I view myself as an equal to God, then I am his equal. Or I can make judgments about God, then I am his equal. But what is our understanding of God? For me, God is an unknowable essence. He's benevolent, but he can also be avenging. We see this in every holy book. So faith is always a test. Now I want to go to the idea of he put the fear of God in Pharaoh. In the material world, there are physical laws that cannot be broken. And in the spiritual world, my understanding is it is the same. So when it says God puts fear into the heart of Pharaoh, there are certain spiritual laws that have been established. And Pharaoh has closed himself off. And it's because of these divine laws that it seems that he has put this fear in. Because if we break the laws of God, well, if I'm not receptive to the laws of God, I should have fear. So I don't think it's that he put it in so much as that there are spiritual laws. Pharaoh was not open at all to what Moses said, and those spiritual laws are what hardened his heart. And where did the spiritual laws come from? They come from God.
Oh, now that's lovely.
Okay, Hannah, you want to say something, and then I'll call upon Margot.
Okay. When we come to this Torah portion, I always wish that I was able to explain the Hebrew words, the kavod, the hardening, the chazak, the two words for hardening Pharaoh's heart, and the progression of who hardens what and how does that happen, as well as Stephen always does. And those of you who studied with him for years know what I'm talking about. But I couldn't do it like you in the same way that you could. So I'm waiting to hear you do that part. Yeah.
Okay.
I did have one other thing to say,
Yeah.
which is totally hasn't been mentioned here at all. And I haven't thought of it until this year. We were reading about eating the lamb, cooking the lamb, eating all of it, don't break a bone of it, and burn it before morning. So there's nothing left. And I was contrasting that with the thought of sitting for 3 days in darkness where you can't see anyone else. But didn't we read someone is dead in every household? There's a dead body lying there for 3 days. And I'm thinking the smell. We don't have smell in this one yet, but I'm thinking, oh, the smell. And so when the Israelites leave, we clean up our stuff. We burn all the flesh. We leave a clean fire pit. And it's just that central kind of awareness too that I was sort of thinking
Thank
about.
you.
No, that's neither here nor there, I
Thank you.
suppose.
Let me call upon Margot and first, and then Justin, did you want to say something again? So let me call upon Margot, then okay, Margot, Justin, Wendy, and then
I don't know why my picture isn't up, but you can hear me. My gosh, do you not see the relationship between what is happening today? The face of evil is having horrible things are happening to it. I mean, the face of evil, Hamas, is being punished now by Israel. The face of horror. I mean, I see, and I guess we might say that God is Israel's hand. And I mean, Hamas is exactly like Pharaoh. They've had chances but their heart is always hardened. And the horror, similar to the plagues, is now being visited on these people. And I see a relationship. It just hit me in the stomach as I was reading this.
Thank you, Margo. And Justin, and then Wendy.
Just respectfully thanking that this conversation is allowed to exist. So thank you so much for that. I think I would go with the sense that whether called or uncalled, the God is present. God is present between myself and the Jew or the member of Hamas. It's right in between us. It's not some authority, some other place. It's existing in our living field. The other God is an authoritarian figure that people are using for power.
Thank you, Justin. And Wendy. Wendy, your seer audio doesn't seem. I'm sorry, we're still not getting your audio. No, I'm sorry, it's not working for some reason. Maybe there's some points you could raise in the chat.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
There you are. Now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. When I saw the burning of the lamb, it was interesting you just said that because that was brought to my attention as well. And I felt like the burning to leave nothing behind, take with what's in you with you, and use what's within you to move somewhere that is new and different and unknown, and rely upon oneself and each other to enter somewhere that where there is that kind of fear. And I also saw God being very kind with that too, in many ways, even though there's a lot happening that is not so kind, but he's giving them rituals to come together on the 14th day of each month. He's giving them ways of coming together as a community, rituals to perform in this new land, as well as almost like a beginning entry to this unknown, to have something to step into it with. And I found that really fascinating. I like that juxtaposition. I was enjoying that juxtaposition.
Wow. Thank you, Wendy. That's fantastic. And David, Susan.
Yes, and listening to Wendy, it occurred to me that by being instructed to every year rehash this, every year go over it, we have to ascertain what it means to us and what it and why it was necessary and why it is necessary, that it gives us strength and it makes us wonder.
Nice. Thank you. So what deep and thoughts and reflections people have shared coming from deep within everyone's hearts is what makes it also compelling. So let me try and bring some things together that have come up. Torah is not a story about something that happened. Torah is a story about something that's happening. And as Susan just mentioned, it's why we read this and enact this every year. And in fact, in this week's portion, we read words essentially along the lines of, God says, I'm doing this so that you will have a story to tell your children. It seems as if these events that we've been reading last week and this week are happening in order to engender a story. And that's what we do at the Passover Seder. And when we have our Passover Seder, we're not just supposed to be telling history, we're supposed to be animating ourselves in acts of liberation. That's what the Seder is about. It's about a dramatic experience of liberation. And so just generally, more specifically about these God hardening Pharaoh's heart and so forth, as Anna mentioned, yes, I try to point out, maybe I fail to do clearly enough every year, that the first several plagues that happened, the Hebrew verb for the hardening of the heart or the strengthening of the heart is in the reflexive form, which means that it is something that Pharaoh is doing to himself. Pharaoh hardened his own heart. Pharaoh caused a harshness in his own heart. And until we get to these last few plagues, that then the verb becomes in its direct active form. God did this to Pharaoh. Up to that point, it's been a causation of Pharaoh's own doing. So the bigger picture then is to look at Torah and to see it as, at least I want to share with you how I look at Torah, which is as a great work of art. And as with any artist, a great artist, they are not merely trying to replicate what's in front of them. They are trying to represent their experience of what is in front of them, or perhaps what they have encountered by having an experience with someone or something that's in front of them. And that's what ends up being on the canvas. And in particular, in modern art, that becomes really very evident with the Impressionists in particular, who make very express that what they're sharing is not the tree, but my encounter with the tree. And I'm sharing with you on the canvas my subjective experience of seeing this tree. And that opens up the floodgates for the rest of modern art, where modern art increasingly becomes not an attempt to replicate or represent what's in front of the artist, but the artist's journey that has been animated by encountering either a scene, a model, or an object. Yeah. So it is, I want to suggest with Torah that what's happening here is someone is not recording what they know God to have done to Pharaoh. They are looking, perhaps, they are reflecting on experiences maybe they haven't even had, but stories they've been told. Why would someone have acted this way? And so they paint this picture, in this case with Pharaoh, who is so committed to a despotic, authoritarian, totalitarian, possessive, ego-driven way of life, that people look at that and say, well, he's holding on to all these people because that's a reflection of his personality, of his outlook on life. He refused to let things go. And so then at some point, the painting takes the hue of, and so if that's the way he is, it is as if the force of the universe is now with him, is now allowing that person to fully express himself in all of his materialism and in all of his egotism and in all of his possessiveness and in all of his danger and in all of his threats and violence. And it's going, and so now it becomes a matter of then painting this picture that now tries to create some kind of opposition to that. And of course, the opposition to that is to remove oneself from the confines of a realm that the name Egypt is given to, that which is narrow and confined and constrained and enslaving, and now begins to paint a different setting, which we'll come to in the weeks to come, which is an expanse. It is openness. It is, and in that openness, these people will begin to encounter a voice that says, you are connected to the fullness of the universe. And if you want to harmonize with the fullness of that universe, you need to act in a way that shows responsibility, accountability, and a sense of communalness. And that will hopefully lead to this promised land, which is less a matter of geography than it is a matter of how one acts as a human being. So that's just the way I look at this, which is it's not a reporting, it's a work of art. And that work of art results from people experiencing something and trying to paint a picture that takes us to a place of what it means to be a human being that is whole. And so this notion that we have here, which I find to be one of the most profound lessons that is carried throughout Jewish wisdom, is that life is experienced as a series of separations. There's no way around that. And for many of us, those degrees of separation engender sometimes fear, sometimes grievance, sometimes hatred, sometimes selfishness, but it also has the possibility to engender within us, if we have a good spiritual and psychological set of practices, a sense of connection, a sense of awe. And in fact, there's a lovely quote that I shared in the weekly commentary by the former director of Hillel at Harvard. He says, awe is what happens when I understand fear is not about me. That when we have these sense of that I am singular, but I am also connected. And that's what this narrative is driving at. It's driving at an opposition between those who hold on to their separateness, which causes violence and destruction, and those who are able to see beyond their separateness and to see their connection to a transcendent that, as Robert points out, ultimately is unknowable. It is ultimately a mystery. But with the right kind of spiritual and psychological practice, you can see that mystery not as a threat, but as a promise, as a source of hope and source of guidance and a greater sense of connection, not only with every human being, but with all of creation. So I want to thank each and every one of you for helping me to move in this realm of individual self, and to recognize that the individual self that I am is connected on such a deep level, and such a profound level with so many people, and ultimately with all of creation. And you helped me to do that. So I'm very grateful for you
Thank
to help me turn fear into awe, and to be able to increasingly enter the expanse that is the spiritual realm of ultimate freedom, liberation, and responsibility. Anna, you want to share one last thing?
I don't want to share anything. I just want to ask you again. Do you think that God allowing Pharaoh to continue to harden his heart, to become more of who he was, who he wanted to be, evil as it is or was, that allowing the hardness of Pharaoh's heart to come to its fullness was a gift that God was allowing him to be who he was so that he could be right up against at the bottom of the river and go into the ocean, that there's a moment of transcendence at the end of that for him, that there wouldn't be if he didn't become all of who he was.
I'm not sure I follow everything about the end of.
If Pharaoh's heart is completely hardened and he's
Yeah.
and he backs himself in a corner and cements himself in, that's where he wanted to be. God lets him be there because that's what he really,
okay.
that's where he was going.
So,
And then when you completely run out of options, then maybe you have your moment of transcendence.
maybe. So there is a line within Talmud that says, whatever a human being truly desires to be, the universe helps them to be that way.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And so if those people who truly want to be isolated from all other human beings, ultimately the universe is going to say, you're it. That's the way you are. And so, yeah, Pharaoh represents that tendency within us to be so egocentric, so possessive, that is what we are driven to do. And there's always the opportunity, I suppose, for redemption. But ultimately, at least within the Jewish tradition, there's really no such thing as individual redemption or salvation apart from communal redemption and salvation. And so that's the notion that I become who I can be in the most fullest and holiest sense, is part of an integration with and connection with a community of people who are also in pursuit of that. So again, I want to thank everyone for being companions with me on this sacred journey. I look forward to our regathering. God bless you all. Be well, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Lovely.